Hello folks, welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. The New York Times journalist John Elligan and his colleague ran a coup of sorts in the New York Times today, an interview with South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, in which Ramaphosa has done his best to dig a grave for South Africa. He's really just done all he can to bury the country. In the interview, Ramaphosa repeatedly called Trump racist and questioned the policies of America and made false statements throughout. I want to address some of those right here now in this video. And I'm going to use quotes from John Elligan's article. Mr. Ramaphosa said the Oval Office meeting turned into a spectacle and an ambush instead of a discussion during which Mr. Trump handed him a stack of newspaper clippings, some of which were unrelated to South Africa. Now, there's no context in this article, and perhaps it's simply because John Elligan is reporting what Ramaphosa said, but he does editorialize in this article, and I'll make another video commenting on his editorial notes. But the problem here is that this interview doesn't push back. Ramaphosa said the Oval Office meeting turned into a spectacle and an ambush. How can you be ambushed for a meeting that you requested, Cyril? You and your government begged the White House for a meeting with Trump because of events. They cleared the calendar and graciously let you come. And then you had the audacity to show up 43 minutes late for a meeting with the President of the United States. This isn't Pretoria. This isn't Cameroon. This isn't West Africa. Have the courtesy to show up on time for the most powerful political figure on the planet. I don't know how you feel ambushed. If anybody was ambushed, it was Trump by your tardiness, trying to put him off base and off angle and not at ease. As far as the stack of newspaper clippings, some of which were unrelated to South Africa, that's poppycock. That's been demonstrably proven as false. That is simply not true. Yes, there were pictures of an article from South African media talking about violence in Africa with a picture of the DRC. But the article addressed South Africa. And see, these are the lies that the media perpetrates and that politicians perpetrate. Those articles included information about South Africa specifically. Despite the lies, it's simply not going to float here. We deal in facts. Ramaphosa continued in the interview. I just thought that he's so uninformed, truly uninformed. Wow, talk about insulting. Why do you say something like this? Do you have no concept of diplomacy whatsoever? I guess not. You send an ambassador who spews racial hatred towards the United States on his second ambassadorial tour to the United States. Apparently, Ibrahim Rasool can only like America when a black man runs it. Otherwise, it's racist. He said, I realize that he's looking at South Africa through a completely sort of foggy lens without realizing the real harm that apartheid did. In my view, he was just dismissive. The real harm that apartheid did. Really? How about the 32 years of ANC governance that have impoverished 3 times as many black South Africans as the National Party ever did? How about the 145 race-based laws doing exactly what the National Party did, but flipping the script and oppressing a different part of the population? What does apartheid have to do with anything? Nothing. Not to mention that John Elligan, the New York Times editors, incorrectly used the lowercase for apartheid. It's a proper noun. Whether you like it or not, as evil as it was, it's a proper noun. Use English properly. It's capitalized. It's the name of something, not an adjective. As far as Trump being dismissive, if anybody was dismissive, it was Ramaphosa lying to the President of the United States. When the video was shown of the white crosses placed along the road outside Normandie in honor of Glenn and Vita Rafferty, who were brutally murdered on their farm, Darryl Brown put those crosses out there. When that was shown, Ramaphosa said to Trump, Mr. President, do you know where this is? I've never seen this before. How could anybody possibly believe that to be the truth? The dismissive person was Ramaphosa, dismissing the facts in front of his eyes. Now, Ramaphosa just doubled down. He said that some of Trump's policies are racist, that the Ukraine should not join NATO, and pressed the importance of non-aligned middle powers like his country, particularly during times of crisis and conflict. Well, there are important non-aligned middle powers like Oman, who are helping negotiate something between Iran and the United States. But South Africa isn't doing anything except sticking its nose into Gaza. It did nothing with the Myanmar's genocide case that the Gambia brought, a unique prosecution in the ICJ that no country had ever done. That case was filed in 2019, and it finally came before the court in 2026. South Africa has failed to become a friend of the court. No amicus briefs filed, no joining the case like 7 other nations have done, yet they want to pretend they have the high moral ground. And as far as Ukraine joining NATO, that was never in the cards. Never in the cards. They weren't even joining the European Union. Those are Russian excuses. Ramaphosa is parroting what his masters and overlords in Moscow have told him to say. to talk about Ukraine and NATO. They were never joining. In fact, they're closer now, courtesy of the invasion, which the ANC has supported. And he continued, this just gets worse. Ramaphosa just can't help himself digging this hole. I do think the Afrikaner policy is racist, Mr. Ramaphosa said. It's that racist sort of demeanor that we want to be able to whittle down so he can see the truth of the situation. Well, when you want to talk about racist, calling the Afrikaner policy an Afrikaner policy when there's no such policy. There's a refugee policy for South Africa. And for the billionth time, for the lazy media and the lazy politicians, they're not lazy. They just like lying to people. Here you see a screenshot of what the criteria are to become a refugee in this program. You must be of Afrikaner ethnicity. That would be the reason why Ramaphosa calls the Afrikaner policy, except that's not the whole story. Or be a member of a racial minority. I've interviewed Indians, coloreds, and black South Africans who've come to the United States under this program. Yet to this day, the ANC still calls it a racist policy, even though it brings all races to America. The stupidity needs to stop. And the fact that the New York Times journalist doesn't even question this, doesn't even point out that the embassy website said something completely different and that the people arriving here do not match the description that Ramaphosa presents here is beyond a moral failing. And it just gets better and better. The hits just keep coming. He says, I think he's just bereft of any reality about what South Africa is all about and what it stands for. Well, what does it stand for, Cyril? He said, we're rather amazed at the attention he gives us. No, you're not. You spend all your time trying to get attention from the United States. You and the captured media in South Africa endlessly attack the United States, provocation after provocation, story after story, falsely making claims about Donald Trump and about the United States, seeking attention. You're the one seeking attention. The United States is not even remotely interested in South Africa. I know. I cover South Africa and nobody wants to hear anything about it because it's unimportant. So you're not amazed at the attention. You're not getting the attention. That's the problem. You're seeking attention. We are a small country and we are no threat to the United States. But indeed you are, because your country has been a hub, a nexus of terror financing and a logistics hub for terrorists and also money laundering. That's why you're on the gray list for the financial task team. And frankly, you should still be on it. You do present a threat to the United States. Giving succor to terrorists, aligning with rogue regimes, don't present a threat to the United States. How is it not a threat to the United States? How is it that a journalist for the New York Times doesn't even raise these basic points in his article? He didn't have to question Ramaphosa, although he should have. If I had been interviewing Ramaphosa, he said, we're not a threat to the United States. I'd have said, well, how so? He said he believed that Trump's visa restrictions and bans unfairly targeted African nations and were driven by a racist demeanor. Once again, this is just racist drivel. Trump's travel bans are on countries who are serial violators of overstaying their visas. Now, frankly, he needs to tread the ground very carefully here because South Africa has plenty. Numerically, it has more visa violators than any other country in Africa. But the percentage is quite small. That's why South Africans haven't received a visa travel ban to America, because the percentage is small. But the actual numbers of South Africans who violate their visa and stay here as criminal alien invaders exceeds every country in Africa. So Ramaphosa better be careful. Living in glass houses, one shouldn't throw stones. There's no white genocide and there's no grabbing of land, of white people's land. And white farmers are not being driven out of the country and badly treated. Now, the problem with that is the facts tell a different story. In Northwest Province in East London, where the police stole the land, in Seshego, just days after Ramaphosa signed the expropriation without compensation bill, land invaders stole land and divided it up. And here you see a screenshot from South African Broadcasting Corporation covering this, a video that has only 9,600 views a year later. This video showed these people illegally seizing private land from private landowners who happen to be white. The government took no steps to stop it. There's been no media coverage of this land theft since it occurred. And I've never seen this journalist ever again. Maybe he's on SABC and I haven't seen him. But this story was buried. This is one example of land. Every day land is invaded, occupied, and stolen by South Africans. And up until 2024, the government of South Africa would intervene, particularly in Joburg with the Red Ants, driving illegal squatters off of government land and sometimes off of private land. Land theft is a real thing in South Africa, and it's been encouraged by the government because the government has taken no steps to stop it. Therefore, they're complicit in it. So he can sit here and lie about no land grabbing, but it's simply factually untrue. As I sort of unpacked it later, I realized that it was an ambush, and I was least prepared for that. How could it be an ambush, Cyril? You asked for the meeting. You knew what the issues were with the United States. You knew the concerns of the Trump administration. This is not a surprise. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where Cyril Ramaphosa dug South Africa's grave. Doubling down. He already insulted President Trump repeatedly during the G20 summit. He's insulted President Trump over and over again over the past year since President Trump became president. He insulted his intelligence back in 2018 at the interview with Bloomberg, lying about farm murders and lying about white farmers. I don't know what planet he's living on or what he hopes to accomplish by this. But South Africa is rapidly losing friends in the axis of evil. Venezuela has been taken off the chessboard. Cuba has been taken off the chessboard. Iran is in the process of being taken off the chessboard. That leaves Russia and China and Brazil as South Africa's friends in the axis of evil. Lulu is short for this world. He's a criminal who will be removed from government. It's just a question of when. Convicted felon, by the way. Yeah, so this really is a fantasy world that the president of South Africa is living in. And the fact that he decided to use such language to insult the president of the United States. Imagine for a moment if Donald Trump ran around and called Cyril Ramaphosa racist. The media would lose their minds. John Elligan and other New York Times reporters probably would issue interrogatives. How can you call President Ramaphosa racist? Was that question posed in this interview? I don't know. It's not in the story. Perhaps it was and didn't make it through the editing process. But if Donald Trump called Ramaphosa a racist, that would be front page news. That would be the story everyone's talking about. But Ramaphosa can call Trump a racist with no basis whatsoever on false allegations and false assumptions and leaps to conclusions. So Ramaphosa has dug South Africa's grave. He will be remembered as the worst leader in post-apartheid history in South Africa. And that says something. That's quite an accomplishment in and of itself. The worst leader of South Africa. What say you, South Africa? Mzansi. Cheers.